Okay. So, welcome everyone to today's Esports Research Colloquium. My name is Oliver Leis, and I'm really happy to report that it's been 1 year since I first hosted the Esports Research Colloquium. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to all participants and speakers that have joined and have enriched these sessions. To celebrate the idea of the colloquium, that is to provide a forum for knowledge exchange, for networking, and also discussing ideas, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. David Hedlund for today's session. I think he's the perfect fit for today's Q&A session and the perfect fit to talk about esports research and also esports journals. Before we start with today's session, I'd like to acknowledge that today's meeting is being recorded, and in case you have any questions but don't want to appear during the recording, feel free to forward your questions to me. Now, without further ado, let's start the party. And dear David, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Well, good morning from New York, good afternoon, Europe, good evening, Asia, depending on where people may be. As Oliver said, my name is David Hedlund. I am an associate professor of sport management at St. John's University, which is in Queens, Manhattan, Staten Island, New York. Here at St. John's, I wear a number of hats, as I think almost every academic does. I'm also the chairperson of the Division of Sport Management. I sit on a number of the research funding committees for research grants. So for example, NSF grants, any NSF grants that St. John's is kind of going out there. We work with the authors to help them, create the perfect application to go and get research funding. When I'm not doing my university gig, I am the founding chief editor of the Journal of Electronic Gaming and Esports. I'm the lead editor and author of the textbook Esports Business Management. And so over the last 4 or 5 years, I've pivoted much of my research, much of the activities I do outside of my teaching, to esports. These days here in the United States, we have probably 350 universities that are participating in esports. I've probably worked with about 50 of them, just in terms of let's build an esports program, let's build esports curriculum, let's build out esports classes, some of these kind of things. So I'm really happy to be here. Oliver, congratulations on 1 year. It's my honor to be here and celebrate your 1 year anniversary. So
thank you. That's a huge profile you've got there. And I wonder, or could you please explain how it came that esports was added to your area of interest, including aspects such as management, marketing, coaching, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, it would be fun if I could say, turn to page 3 in my textbook, and when we start going through the history, realize that I was there when that history was being created. So, I mean, a lot of it goes back to the late 70s and early 1980s, when consoles were kind of first being produced. I loved gaming. I loved playing Pong and Space Invaders and all of these games. And of course, when NES came out later, the 2-player games, which are very much more like today's esports, in the 1990s with kind of Dungeons and Dragons, and then MUDs, some of those first multi-user dungeon games in the 1990s, and then Warcraft into the early 2000s. And then we could pretty much just skip 20 years then and say, in 2013, my son was born. And so becoming a dad changed my perspective on this a little bit. And so my son loves Minecraft. He loves Roblox. And so we do a lot of gaming. I predominantly game now these days on my phone just because I'm pretty busy. But I've been involved in gaming as a participant, and then more recently kind of as a parent, but then even more recently kind of in research. and recognizing that the discipline I kind of come out of is value creation in business and marketing. So when you think about what is esports, esports is a medium through which value creation can happen. And so because of this, I recognize there's this great opportunity for esports to be a platform, be a medium, be an activity, even maybe replace sports. That there are people who we would probably call them non-able body Paralympians who cannot play traditional sports, but they can play esports. And in fact, having been a national team coach for football, we call it soccer, men and women of every background being able to play together without any inherent advantages or disadvantages, just your God-given skill and then what you've developed. Esports is really an interesting area. And so the last 4 or 5 years, I've really been as all in as one can be to kind of fight the battle for let's get resources, starting with the first textbook, now with kind of the first publisher-supported journal, and so on.
Thank you. You already addressed some of the opportunities or benefits of research in esports or of esports in general, such as the aspect of inclusion. But what other opportunities do you see for research in esports?
So if I give a little bit of a shout out to the journal, so our first call for papers closed on March 1st, and the first call was on diversity and sustainability. So Emma Vosen from she's in Canada. She is the lead guest editor of this, but there's several of others of us who are all participating in this. As the first special issue, I mean, we had no expectations. Are we going to get 2 submissions, 5 submissions, 10? We didn't know. In the end, we got 30 abstract submissions for this first special issue. Now, how many of those become papers? We'll see. How many of those end up getting published? Again, we'll see. But I was absolutely blown away by the topics that I saw on the sustainability side. We saw environmental sustainability. We saw business sustainability topics. On the diversity side, every possible perspective you could imagine. One of the most marginalized populations here in the United States is what we would call Native Americans. Originally called Indians when explorers from Europe came over, but we would probably call them Native Americans. And there's a submission about gaming within this community and how gaming can affect this community and be used by this community, leveraged for the building of community. And so, disability research, wheelchair gaming. I mean, I was just absolutely blown away by these topics. And so the answer to your question, Oliver, is infinity. I mean, the topics that are out there are infinite. There are so many different ways in which we can take perspectives on what's going on in and around esports and gaming, that the sky's the limit. So there's many, many, many topics. I always try to encourage young researchers, figure out what your core is, what your identity is. In my case, I'm kind of marketing, consumer behavior, some sports, esport, these kind of things. That's kind of what where I've wrapped my identity around this. If young research can figure this out for themselves, find topics then that are central to who you are. Because in the process of exploring these topics that are central to you, you will have to look at alternatives. You can never have there's a hypothesis with no opposite side. That's why we have hypotheses and null hypotheses. You can't have one without the other. It's kind of the same thing in esports and sports and just research in general. So when you figure out what you're interested in, you're going to be forced you're obviously going to love researching what you like, but you're also going to have the opportunity to look at alternatives, other pieces of the kind of the macro questions. And so you will inevitably discover other topics, other ideas that you may latch onto. You know what? I was really interested in marketing, but you know what? Maybe I'm actually more of a quantitative analyst sort. Maybe that's what I like. Maybe I like to dig into the data and figure out, quantitatively, what is it about this social media campaign that's really interesting, that's really activating behaviors. I don't care whether they're using a happy story or a sad story or the nuts and bolts of the marketing. I want to look at the data. I want to look at like channel A versus channel B. Which worked better, Instagram or TikTok? Which ones got more engagement? Which ones resulted in people sticking around for longer? Taking a look at whatever our marketing activities were. And so by figuring out what you're interested in, you will then have the opportunity to kind of expand a little bit and then really kind of like figure out your core, but then also start to look around a little bit and then maybe expand your core and then maybe even shift a little bit. So there's a lot of things that are out there that people can kind of look at and discuss, research.
Thank you. I really liked and enjoyed the way you expressed the answer to that question. Really energetic. You also dived into different aspects such as the journal that we want to talk about later during today's session, and also the ways that young researchers or people that are new to the field of esports research can consider when conducting esports research. But I'd like to move now to the topic of disadvantages or maybe challenges in researching esports. What is your opinion about that?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with how do we spell esports, and then goes from there. I mean, there's been a debate. I mean, I didn't even know how many times I've taken the survey on LinkedIn about how do you spell esports. Capital E, small sports. Lower E, big S, then ports. I mean, how do we spell it? So when we still are debating simple things like this, we know we're at a little bit of a disadvantage. When people ask the question of, are sports or are esports a sport? Going to the fundamental core of what it is that gaming activities, gaming behaviors are, we are at a little bit of a disadvantage. So the first disadvantage we have is we've got to kind of like figure some of these things out, put these behind us, and then move forward. On the esports spelling, if anyone's interested, I kind of follow whatever the news media has a guidebook. And the newest guidebook is esports has no capital letters unless it's at the front of a sentence.
And no hyphen. No hyphen either.
No hyphen. So this is the New York Times media guidebook, whatever it is on writing news stories and things like this. So I hopefully this one will be finished here pretty quick. In the book, we lay out a very both sides of the argument, but one of the things we kind of say is when we get to probably Web 3.0, when we get to the point where gaming is going to be gross body movements, kind of like what's going on in Ready Player One, the movie. When we get to that point, the issue of is esports a sport? Because the only argument that currently exists is that esports is really more fine motor control and sports are gross muscular or motor movements. That's the only difference right now that's left between sports and esports. And of course, we could easily find some examples of sports that are more about fine motor control and one's brain than gross body movements. So there are already exceptions to the rule, which kind of goes to the point that I think many of us have been making for years, which is esports is a sport, or it can be a sport. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. It can be recreation. There's lots of things it could be, but it can be a sport. But hopefully in the near future, that disadvantage or that kind of challenge will be taken care of. Once we get past that, probably the next challenge, we already see this in the United States. Anyone who's been to the United States know that we have a little bit of a gun issue. We have a little bit of a violence issue. There's a lot of reasons behind this. I definitely don't want to get into it here. But at the same point in time, whenever there is, we would call it here in the United States, a mass casualty event, when 3 or 4 or more people are killed, one of the inevitable causes of this is movies and gaming. That somehow gaming it's causing people to want to go out and murder people. So I can certainly share with all of you here, and it's being recorded, so I guess it'll be shared even more broadly, but I've said it many times. I've done some research on this, and in fact, my thinking on this, based on what research I've done, is the causality is actually backwards. That people kind of propose, well, you play games, so because you play games, you're gonna then want to go out and shoot people. If we reverse the causality, if I wanted to be the best soccer player, footballer, I'd need to go practice. If I wanted to be the best tennis player, I got to go practice. Golfer, go practice. If I wanted to kill people as best as I can, let's say I were in the military, and I don't have any guns or any bullets. I have no stock to do this. How can I improve my ability to do this? Well, certainly an answer would be gaming. And so when we juxtapose this idea into this issue, we could see that, there are a lot of people who, let's just say they may have a feeling, I'm angry at people for whatever reason, and I need to, commit this kind of horrific act. Whatever should be going on in my mind that should stop me from doing this isn't working. I'm whatever. One of the ways in which people might practice for this kind of activity would be gaming. Now, it's certainly not why most people do it. We're not playing first-person shooters to become murderers. That's not what we're doing. But there may be some people who feel this way, a small portion of the population. And so this is why we may see that there is a gaming background in many of these individuals who committed these horrific acts, why we may see this commonality. But again, all the United States has to do is look at other countries. There are other countries that have similar gun policies that don't have the same issues.
Well, I think it was proven, David. I think former President Trump said, obviously, it's video games causing gun violence, which is, the opposite is always true. And then he said, look at Japan, they don't have shootings because they don't have video games, which is one of my favorite quotes ever in it being wrong. So I think former President Trump proved it's not true by the fact he lies all the time.
Yeah, I do my best to just use the word president and not specify necessarily which one I'm talking about. I try to stay as apolitical as possible, but the example that you gave is a good one. Where this is why journals like the Journal of Electronic Gaming and Esports, International Journal of Esports, the Annals of Esports Research, the International Journal of Esports Research, which is the IGI title, why these journals are so important. So maybe if I because I know a couple of the questions that are coming, let me pivot to maybe talk about this a little bit. When I finished, in fact, I wasn't even finished with writing the textbook. When the 47 of us finished writing that textbook, one of the things that we'd already been discussing with the publisher was, hey, what about a journal? Because at that point in time, there weren't any journals on esports. The closest that we had was Games and Culture. And so, what is that, a Routledge or a Taylor and Francis title? That was the closest one we kind of had. But all of us, I think we have piles of research we've submitted it, and then we get a rejection back saying, this seems like great research, but it doesn't fit in this journal. That this has been a very common thing that's been said to many of us over the last 5 to 10 years. And so it was a pretty easy discussion to have with my publisher, Human Kinetics, about, hey, we need a journal. But as kind of we got into the nuts and bolts of building the journal, one of the topics that continued to be a part of the conversation was, listen, we could see it very clearly in COVID because the book was actually being finished at the beginning of COVID. One of the things that we saw was there's so much misinformation out there about a number of topics. And so where do people go when they are looking for facts or truth? Let's not get into a president's alternative facts and some of those kind of things, Brian. We can debate that issue at another colloquium. But when people are looking for facts, truth, research-based conclusions, usually they go to journals. What happens when you don't have a journal to provide this kind of information? And so this has been a major challenge that gaming and esports has faced. That kind of a lot of activities have been going on. Now, don't get me wrong, working with a lot of the big publishers, they do research. But a lot of them, a lot of the research they do, they would say it is proprietary and it can't be shared. So they do research. They have better understandings of a lot of this than we do. But even kind of the trade associations that are supposed to, that are funded by these companies and defend, many of them, they do some, but not a lot. There hasn't been a lot of pushback. And so one of the things that esports and gaming needs is it needs more facts. And the only way that we get facts, kind of based on the way in which we do things these days, are through journals, through these terms of scholarly debates, where team A researches a topic, team B, and then we compare findings. And that's then done through journals, through conferences, through a lot of these things. And so we've really tried to position the Journal of Electronic Gaming and Esports, JEGE, as a journal where this is what we're going to try to do. But at the same point in time, if anyone's seen our second call, which just came out, it just went up on our website on Monday, I think, or over the weekend. Our second call is now up. And our second call is, we are partnering with the Hawaiian International Conference on Service Sciences, which is in Hawaii in January. Brian's, Dr. McCauley's got a digitalization of work, right, Brian?
Yeah, and it's Brian, not Dr. McCauley, but yeah, we're doing digitalization work, which can include esports, because if you look at Nico Bessom's Medium site on all the esports professions, it's amazing that so many people focus on being a pro player when there's less chance than you being a pro soccer player, as David would say, and the jobs around esports and the practices of esports work, and even how as esports academics we use Discord a lot more, and we don't fluff around with a bunch of useless meetings. We communicate directly because we're gamers and we're esports, and we kind of maybe work more efficiently than the traditional model of boring academic meetings that repeat themselves.
Right. And the great thing, though, is, so while we couldn't get Brian and his group to kind of come on board with us, two of the mini tracks there, Peter Maciej and myself, we are co-coordinating the esports mini track. Nathaniel Poor and Steph Orm, they are overseeing I believe it's the 7th year for the games and gaming track. Brian and Nico and Tobias, they're doing the digitalization of work. Juho and Tobias, they're also doing another one. So I think there's at least 4 tracks of 179, but there's 4 that have a video game or an esports. 2 of those, my track and Nat and Steph's track on games and gaming, JEGE is, let's call it, a partner for these 2 tracks. And so the papers that are accepted, they will have the opportunity to get a fast track towards publication in JEGE. Even, and again, because I'm a journal editor, or the founding chief editor, I have some power. And so, for example, like if you're rejected from things, there are oftentimes, that's the end of your opportunity. But even if you're rejected, if your research has promise, if there's something there that, hey, I'm a young scholar, I'm just learning how to do good quality research, there will also be some of these kind of opportunities as well. And so JEG is going to support both of these tracks, but other research as well. And so we're really trying to position JEG to help. At the same time, though, one of the challenges is, in the mid-1980s, the first sport management journals were being made. The Journal of Sport Management was the first one in 1986. It probably took 4 to 5 years before other journals started to arise. But today, there are 70 or 80 sport journals around the world. There are local journals, Cologne University Sport Management Journal. There's, European Sport Management Quarterly. There's the Journal of Global Sport Management. There's all of these journals of sport finance, sport law, sport psychology. There's all these journals. But it really all started with the Journal of Sport Management in 1986. So certainly while what IJE Sports has done, I think has been good, because they're not supported by a traditional publisher, they can't really get into the web of science. The best they can kind of do is get into like Google Scholar, some of these kind of things. They can have some impact, but JEGE, we can get into Scopus, we can get into the web of science. Things that, once we kind of get more published and kind of get bigger, we'll be able to get into all of these kind of places. So we'll be on par with the Journal of Business Research, the Journal of Marketing, the Journal of Sport Management. And so this will then get our research out there farther. The second piece of it, of course, is I have the book and I'm the chief editor right now of the journal, which you could probably imagine means those are connected too. So in fact, if there are things that are published in JEGE, which have a good relationship to something in the book, we're actually going to pair them with the book. And so there's digital materials that go with the book. And so students who use the book, faculty who use the book, will then also get access to some of these articles. And so students, when they are studying esports, they will then also be able to read scholarship on esports and to learn about some of these topics. So, we've bitten off a mouthful, no doubt about it. But fortunately, while I'm not the brightest light bulb, I'm a pretty hard worker. And so far, so good on all of these different things. So we're young, the journal's young, a lot of these things are young, but the textbook is still the only textbook that's out there. Even Brian's got to use it if he wants to do an esports course. So it's
pretty good. I've only got one copy though, so I'm actually, during this meeting, I've asked someone to give it back to me so I can give it to somebody else. So David, I need a couple more copies because I'm literally.
So the Human Connects has a partner in London through whom you can get copies. So anyone who needs them. So how about this? I'm going to write down here on my to-do list to connect you with that group in London to make sure that you can get more instructor copies to kind of take a look at. So sure, that's easy. So Oliver, let me toss it back to you. I'm trying to hit as many of these topics so that we can open it up so that Matt, Alex, Edgar, Luke can ask as many questions as they want on things later.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Could lay back and just listen and enjoy. I have a question that was shortly or briefly addressed, but I want to elaborate on this a little bit more. I think you and some of the audience participants might have noticed that there was a discussion, or let's say a debate in the Esports Research Network's Discord channel, that there are some journals related to esports that already exist, and why the question was raised why we would need another journal. And you, or my expression is that there are relationships, or there's a relationship between your journal of electronic gaming and esports to, for example, the Hawaiian conference and the textbook. But what would you say is the main difference, or what are the difference between your journal and previous esports journals?
Yeah, I mean, I'm published in the International Journal of Esports. You could go read some of my consumer behavior research. In fact, I think I was probably the 6th person published because I was talking to them from day one. I don't look at the relationship that any of these esports journals have as adversarial. I'm not looking to destroy or overtake anything. In fact, quite the opposite. I want more. One of the decisions that we had to make with JEGE when we started it obviously was its name, but also its scope. And so the name and the scope are interrelated. Because we believe there is so much esports research out there that has no outlet, we made the initial decision, we're going to accept all of it. Now, did this cause a little bit of craziness for me? Yes. Populating, 8 associate editors and then almost 50 editorial board members to cover every possible aspect of esports, it took me a couple of months. I'm not going to lie. But I think it strengthens the journal because now it doesn't matter if I get a medical submission, a law submission, a marketing submission, a finance submission, a performance submission, a computer system submission, a virtual reality submission. There are people within either the associate editors or the editorial board who have expertise on these areas. But at the same point in time, again, if I kind of parallel to sports, it started off with a lot of very broad journals. And then specialized journals, once kind of this concept had been like proof of concept, that, okay, there is esports research out there. There are researchers to do the research. There are people who are submitting some of these kind of things. Once we know that, then we can, the Journal of Esports Performance, the Journal of Esports Finance, the Journal of Esports Management, the Journal of Esports Law, all of these kind of subsidiary journals, which today don't exist, but in 10 or 15 years, they're going to exist. So the way that I explain it to everyone, Oliver, I think I explained it to you this same way. We are holding down the fort with IJ Esports and with other journals until, number one, we can get more students with PhDs out there, as I am a professor of esports. I'm a professor of sport management who does esports research. That's kind of like what I am. But when I was studying, esports wasn't really an option. I don't think there were really any scholars at that point in time, or they were mostly just based in Northern Europe at the time. So number one, we need more students. We need more students to study this, more dissertations on these topics, more universities to then open up esports specialized programs, want to hire esports faculty members. Once we kind of like, it's kind of this, everyone's got to kind of pitch in and help. But as this happens, then we're going to get more experts on, my background is psychology. So I'm going to start the Journal of Esports Psychology. And it's going to be all about the psychological principles and practices of teams and games and, all of these types of things. But you need people in the beginning to kind of like, okay, we're going to plant the flag. We're going to try to professionalize the discipline as much as we can, as fast as we can, until help arrives. There's probably some Ukrainian metaphors I might be able to kind of throw in there. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to lay that out there. But I think there are some, right now we are trying to professionalize esports, make it as give people the opportunity to publish as much as possible, obviously with upholding high publishing standards, and then wait until more people then start to learn. Because for me, as a first a doctoral student and then an early career scholar, I learned so much from submitting research and getting it rejected. Because these are experts who understand the methods. They understand better about how to, if I say, here's my research question, I better answer that research question. But there's a lot of times where we're going to take this winding and meandering path from A to something else. And so somebody needs to call me out and say, hey, author, you said the purpose of this research was to do X. But at the end, your final sentence was, and so this paper, we did Y. Okay, do you see this doesn't match? Because this doesn't match, I'm sorry, I got to reject you. But rewrite it, improve it, come back, submit elsewhere, and then let's see. And so, we are really just kind of at the ground stages of professionalizing esports. And so it starts with a couple of journals, very broad. We'll accept many different topics, and then we'll see.
Yeah, I can only agree that it's a good thing to have different opportunities to select from more specific journals or more generalist journals, independent of whether you are an experienced researcher or a novel researcher or PhD student. And a question that is related to creating or launching a journal is that I think it's a huge learning process. And can you share some of the things you've learned while developing the journal?
Seth Jenny is in the waiting room.
Yep.
I will admit him.
I did. Oh, okay.
Okay, I did too.
Great.
Popped up on my screen, so I don't know why, but hey, Seth, welcome. So, just
Hello.
a sidebar, Brian and Seth are both associate editors with JEGE, so probably they felt like they had to be here more just to, like, you know, be here for in those roles, but obviously two tremendous scholars. So thanks for joining us, Seth. So it took longer to build the journal than it did to write the textbook. That's the first piece. A lot of this is because really there were no journals out there. I mean, even when they said in the beginning, when I originally wrote the business plan for JEGE, there were no journals out there. Games and Culture was the only journal at that point in time that existed. So the journals, obviously publishers, and I know some others who approached Routledge and Taylor and Francis about creating similar journals. Many of these publishers, they had the same response, which is there must be a reason why there's no esports journal already in existence. And we're going to take that as the fact that there's nothing out there, there's a reason. And that reason is because no one wants it. And if somebody really wanted it badly, they'd fight for it. Well, you say that to me, guess what? I'm going to fight. But at the time, there really was nothing. Fortunately, though, one of the editors of the book, so there were 47 of us who wrote the book, 3 editors, and then 44 others who contributed to various aspects of the book. One of the other editors, his name is Gil Fried. If you study sports, I would almost guarantee you've read something Gil Fried has written. He's written 5 or 6 textbooks. I know right now he's writing a textbook on betting and gambling for the American market, because now this is something that's kind of legalized. I know Europeans kind of laugh at us about this, but yeah, it's taken us until 2022 to kind of get this going. Just as of kind of beginning of January, we can start gambling in New York. That's how crazy it is here. But Gil has been an author for a number of human kinetics books. And so he and I first kind of got together. We were just chatting about something else. And we're like, hey, New Haven, where he was at the time, St. John's, we're both doing esports stuff. We need a textbook. Well, what are we using? Where are our materials coming from? And so that led to the writing of the book. But about midway through, we started talking to Human Kinetics. Hey, you also publish a whole bunch of journals. So how about we become your 27th journal? And it took probably about a year and a half to convince them. A lot of this was just tenacity, just continuing to talk to all of the different people involved. Even it came down to ERN was kind enough to allow us to piggyback and do some research on ERN members on esports research. Like, how often are people being rejected? What kind of topics are you looking at? Some of these kind of things. So we were able to do a kind of mixed method study on this. Excuse me. And so just continue to give this information to Human Kinetics, and eventually they agreed.
Thank you for these insights. I'd like to jump a little bit in the topics. In your recent textbook or your recent paper on the typology of esport players, I think you argued that despite changes that have occurred within the esports ecosystem, researchers have been unable to keep pace with the rapid changes and maintain updated research on a variety of important topics. And you also addressed the special issue. But could you please elaborate on this argument, this argument?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to what I was describing earlier about the first special issue, all these different topics. There are so many opportunities out there for scholars to do research. I'm writing a research agenda for kind of like marketing and business right now. And literally, Like when I go to the Web of Science and I type in esports, 580 papers. That's it. On all of esports. And in fact, a number of those are actually Spanish pieces that are, because of course in Spanish, sports is esports. So the spelling, oftentimes there are mistakes there. So there is such a dearth of research. There's not much research whatsoever on esports.
David, I'm going to tell you, we've got 1,107 items on the Esports Research Network database, which York University also uses. So, but it's still nothing, and I think you still made a good point, because so many of it is student theses or other languages that are not accessible to people in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's still very lacking.
So I actually tasked off the record. Well, it's not off the record because it's recorded, but my graduate student, my GA, I had him do a search of Google Scholar. So we actually have two lists. We have the Web of Science list and we have the Google Scholar list. And so, again, a lot of these kind of research areas, they've been published outside of a mainstream journal. For example, in the International Journal of Esports. And so, one of the Seth's piece, for example, the $1 billion myth. I think that's the title of it, where kind of he and several colleagues, they show that the esports revenues are probably, if you're more expansive in what you consider to be esports revenue, maybe it's more in the neighborhood of $25 billion, not $1 billion. Well, there's a huge difference there. So a lot of times when I'm talking to people, I say, right, so if you want to know about revenues, read two things. One, read Newzoo. Two, read Jenny and colleagues. Then the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. So I don't know where in the middle of 1 billion and 25 billion, but somewhere in the middle there. It comes down to how do we define what is esports, what are esports revenues, some of these kind of things. Seth and his colleagues had a great debate online with Newzoo about this. That was really kind of fun to listen to and watch. I digress slightly though. So as we kind of explore esports research, yeah, based on what Brian's number is talking about in the esports research database, 50% of all esports research is basically not known because it's been published in journals that are not indexed or otherwise, which kind of goes back to why JEGE is so important, because it'll be the first one that'll be focused on this, which will be able to be indexed once it gets to its certain size, and Clairvient and their colleagues agree that it can then be incorporated. But that'll just be a matter of time. It'll just take some time to get publications in and get some of this data and analytics and metrics. But at the same point in time, there are still tons of opportunities that are out there. In fact, just in, I would say, the last 3 or 4 years, there have probably been at least 6 or 8 major calls at major journals for esports special issues. And so, in 2018, the top journal in sport, which is Sport Management Review, they had half of one issue was devoted to esports. Half. Today, of course, I will probably, I asked my publisher if I need to do 2 double special issues just to cover everything we want to publish for our first special issue in JEGE, is that okay? And they were like, yeah, sure. The more the merrier. No problem, whatever. So we can clearly see there is a need for this. And so there are opportunities exploring many, many, many topics. But again, I mean, we live within this academic framework. And so with the academic framework, if we want to get our research out there, we probably need to publish it through something that is indexed. Otherwise, people who don't use Google Scholar or other kinds of resources, they may never see it. And so it's this kind of constant battle with, we just need to have more resources, more outlets, more people doing research. And so it starts with faculty members. let's try to start PhD programs. Let's try to educate students, and then let's try to help them to fill these esports jobs, which are more and more and more plentiful.
Thanks. And talking of a variety of topics, what topics would you like to proceed more rapidly than others? Are there a choice of 1, 2, 3 topics that you would prefer?
Yeah, I mean, certain. I mean, Brian may be able to better answer this, 'cause I think he knows the ERN database better than I do. But certainly today, we've seen a lot of business. We've seen more and more recently medical, kind of performance in medical. Seth and some of his colleagues, they've been doing more on education. Like the fact that we don't know how many schools have esports, how many schools are offering esports scholarships, a lot of these basic kinds of questions that the New York Times and major publications are always looking for, and so they just go to NACE and they take whatever NACE tells them, as the word of God. It's a challenge. So, but when you think about sports, there's finance, there's law, there's psychology, there's sociology. There's all of these different areas where sport has managed to kind of carve out there is sports sociology, sports psychology, sport finance. The way in which we do these things in sports is different. The same thing is going to be true for esports. If there were one area where I would say, here's something you could look at, that would be things related to kind of Web 3.0, new technology, emerging technology. Whether it's augmented, virtual, mixed, or extended reality, the metaverse, wearables. In the future, I think a lot of this is going to be how we game. And so these topics are going to be really, really important. We've been exploring at JEGE doing one of our next special issues on the metaverse. And so the metaverse is tough, though. I've spent a lot of time trying to explore it. The metaverse in Fortnite is probably going to be different than the metaverse in Facebook. And so one of the big challenges we're going to have is, like, what is the metaverse? And will these separate metaverses be able to be connected into one single metaverse, as in kind of the way it works in the movie Ready Player One? So there's a lot of kind of like emerging technology topics that I think are really pretty interesting. But the fact of the matter is like when I started exploring the metaverse, like I'm not even sure what I would come up with for a research topic, like a research question. Because maybe the best I could start with is like doing some sort of, asking experts questions like define the metaverse, and then do a qualitative piece on, I surveyed 50 experts on technology and esports, and here's an analysis of their responses. So the metaverse is A, B, and C. But probably that's not going to get us really, all that far. We need some metaverses in order to start kind of playing around with them. Although Oculus and Facebook, Meta, they now have the Horizon event app. I've been toying around a little bit in there. It's pretty interesting. I mean, it's just kind of 2D in VR, but when it can become a little bit more immersive, I think it'll be really interesting to kind of take a look at. I saw Matthew had a question.
Yep, I didn't want to interrupt. Matthew, it's your time.
You want to just
is that a
hold
good
off
time?
on questions and give Matthew a chance? Yeah, please.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks very much, David. I completely agree with the need to generate knowledge around esports. I think that will help us all at every level of involvement. I suppose I have a maybe challenging question, a question that I don't really know the answer to, and I hope it comes across in the right way. How do you, as a journal, ensure that research is of a sufficient standard to help practice here? Because yes, there is a need for more, but given that it's so new, there's a justification for any paper really in that it's not been done before. But how can you as a journal, ensure that what is being published is of a meaningful standard and can help on the ground, so to speak?
Yeah, so there's two primary structures when you create a journal. One is the way we've done it, where I'm the editor. I have a board of 8 associate editors, of which Brian and Seth are 2 of them. And then we've got almost 50 editorial board members underneath that. Each of the associate editors in JEGE has a specific area of expertise. Joanne Donahue, for example, she is our kind of like medical expert. When it comes to citations on medical esports research, Joanne is #1 in the world. So anything that we get that is medical, medical performance, any of these kind of things, I get it. I make sure, okay, it looks like the research, wouldn't be a desk reject. And then I give it to Joanne, and then Joanne sends it out. The same goes for other research. Where, if it's on esports education, Seth would probably be the person that I would send it to. So by having this kind of diverse, big board, having more people take a look at it, I think that's always advantageous. At the same point in time, we had a fundamental debate. How many people do we want reviewing articles? Because we added this extra layer, what we felt was we will have 2 reviewers, the associate editor, Brian, Seth, and the other 6, and then myself. So in the end, outside of the editorial team, there are 4 pretty good people whose eyes will all take a look at the research. So we'll get 4 voices on that. Other journals have chosen to do things a little bit differently, where they kind of have 1 editor and then everyone else is an editorial board member. And so these journals tend to be a little bit more specialized. And so the journal editor then kind of like makes a choice about, hey, I'm going to have Brian and Seth review this. I'm going to have Alex and Edgar review this. I know what I know, and I also am pretty good about I know what I don't know. And there's a lot about esports that I don't know. That's why 47 people wrote the textbook, not 1. Because nobody knows everything about esports. I don't care, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you don't know everything about it. So I knew this, I recognized this, so I structured JEGE to have this associate editor level where, when it comes to medical research, I mean, I can read the methods, I can probably understand it, but I don't know who's doing research. I don't keep up with that. It is very well outside of my area of expertise. So because of that, that's why we structured the journal the way we did. Hopefully, knock on wood, by having that structure, let's just say, for example, something comes in that's of a low quality. I'll take a look at it. I'll share it with, Brian, and I'll say, hey, Brian, here's something we got in. Should we get this reviewed? Is this something where we should desk reject this? What do you think? And then we'll kind of work with it, and if it's of a good quality, then we'll send it out. Certainly, though, perhaps even more directly to your point, I would believe when journals first get started, there is an idea of, we want to get things out there as quickly as possible. So we'll sacrifice quality for just getting things out there. We're doing our best with JEG to avoid that. Even if it comes at limiting us, it's no problem. Now, the biggest reason why I've kind of taken that perspective is the publisher, Human Kinetics, the head of the journals division, has said, David, if we only publish 1 issue in 2022, fine. If we publish 0 issues in 2022, fine. As long as we see articles coming in, as long as we see the work getting done, as long as we see progress, but we're not even going to set any benchmarks. Like how many are going to be submitted, accepted, rejected. We're not even going to put any of these kind of quantitative benchmarks on you. Just kind of show us that this works, and we'll kind of give you free rein to run with it. So a lot of this is the journal has been just outstanding with giving us the freedom to look. It's if you don't get 20 acceptances by December 31st, we're shutting you down. So I would actually say the publisher is probably the biggest reason why we're able to kind of take this very slow, careful. We're going to publish high quality stuff. We're not going to fall into this trap of we're just going to publish anything. But at the same point in time, my job, I almost look at it more as I'm the chief marketing officer for the journal, convincing people to come and submit to the journal, because right now our impact factor is 0 because we haven't published any articles yet. We just started January 1st. So we have 0 impact factor. So a lot of authors out there, they need, an impact factor of 1, 2, 3 in order to get credits at their university for publishing something. So there are inherent challenges to this, but there are lots of doctoral students, very good doctoral students, doing great research with their mentors who can get a lot of valuable insight, feedback, and maybe even get published in JEGE. So we're kind of taking the, let's build this slowly, carefully, let's not sacrifice quality, because absolutely you would never want to publish something and then later have to retract it. But then, of course, number 2, this may come across as a slight, and I don't intend it that way, but there are publications out there that, in order to just say, like, we're publishing esports, they've published lower quality stuff. Particularly, we see this in the open access, where they charge money. There have been quite a few journals there who've published, I would consider to be low quality stuff. Because again, they want the money for those fees. They don't really care about the quality. And okay, that's their business. That's how they want to do it. Fine. No problem. There's a place for them. Some people, they just may want it to be out there. Look, I'm going to write something. You, the people who are reading it, you figure out if what I've did is good or bad. I'm just going to publish it and put it out there. Good or bad, right or wrong, I'm just going to put it out there. That's not what we're doing, but there are outlets out there where that opportunity does exist. So we're trying to do it a little bit more carefully. But again, there's no publishing fees at JEGE. If you want to do open access, that there is a fee for that. Although, hint, hint, in the beginning, Human Kinetics is going to, in order to kind of get good press, a lot of the stuff we're going to publish in the beginning will be open access. Just because you had faith in us. You trusted us with your research. And so we're going to give you a little bit of a Christmas gift back. So, yeah.
That's
I hope
great.
that answers your question, Matthew.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Sure.
Are you able to provide us with some insights into the numbers of submissions to the journal and the current status?
Yep, we've had about, I want to say, three submissions so far. Because they're in process, I can't really go much beyond that. For our first special issue, we had 30 abstracts that were submitted for that. And then in the past, I can at least talk about, like with the Hawaiian conference, for example, the games and gaming, last year, I think they had 20 submissions. I think 9 were accepted and then 8 were presented. So yeah, it's, we're literally just starting our 3rd month right now with the journal. But I would probably say I've probably had at least 40 to 50 emails with scholars about, what are the author guidelines, which are easy emails. Go to the websites, click on author guidelines, and everything is listed. So that's a pretty easy one for me to deal with. But I've probably had 10 or 15, which are, hey, I want to bounce an idea off you. And so, they're kind of like, here's what we're looking at. Here's our research questions. Here's how we're proposing to go out and do it. And so I think in that case, many of them, they're actually looking for methodological validation, like the methods that they're using are appropriate. I want to say, having been on other editorial boards, one of the biggest reasons why submissions are rejected is the methods. That whatever they're doing in the methods is wrong. Now, the interesting part about this is let's say we're doing something quantitative. We're going to create a scale. We're going to use that scale to measure something. Then maybe we're going to do some sort of regression or structural model to test it. As long as you have good data, you probably can redo the methods and work with the best methodologists in the world to get it right. But at the same point in time, if you collect data and the data that you've collected is either too little, not of good quality, it's in esports, it's 95% male. Yeah, I mean, you may get some pretty serious questions coming back at you. I mean, I would say I've probably reviewed, in the last 3 years, I probably reviewed 40 esports articles. I just accepted another one yesterday from ESMQ that I'm going to be reviewing. And it's one of those things where a lot of the research is good, although I'm always kind of finding myself asking the question, like, what's new here? It seems like people are kind of, they don't really know what research question to ask, so they ask the same research question. And then it's just, okay, well, we're going to just kind of tweak the setting a little bit. And so doing the same research is okay, but there are so many questions one could ask. Try to come up with new topics, things that others have explored. Like, if you start searching for research and you can't find anything, plant a flag and be like, you know what, I'm going to look at this. Like, if you want an example of this, Seth, is your profile on academia.edu or ResearchGate, are they pretty up to date? Like, if I wanted to send someone to say, look at Seth's research, is there someplace they could go?
Academia.edu, and then I have my own website.
Okay, yeah, I do as well. So if you were to go and look at Seth, like Seth, and again, not a slight to him, he's done research all over the place, which is really kind of interesting. When I brought him on the associate editors, I told my bosses, look, this guy could review like anything. I could give him medical, I could give him education, give him marketing, all of these different areas. He could do all of it. And so, there are scholars like Seth who, they're almost like, hey, let's examine all these different topics, which is great. But there are also some who are like very focused. I just want to focus on one thing. And so, as a researcher, I think I'm a little bit more like Seth. I'd like to find new topics and explore those. I think that's a little bit more interesting for me, but that's just me. But there are so many opportunities out there, I think. I'm going to check your website later. I'm going to open it up right now, Seth. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth, for posting it. You mentioned some of the challenges earlier. For example, it was about the perceptions of esports as sports and the aspect of violence, and I think it was also about the general understanding or the definition of esports. Is there any additional advice that you would give to researchers that want to submit to GIGI, in addition to what you just have mentioned?
Yeah, so if you visit the JEGE website, we've listed out pretty much a comprehensive list of places where we've got experts. Brian and Seth don't know this, but I've actually been one of the when you sign up for the journal on Manuscript Central, we ask scholars to list their expertise. And so one of the things I've been working on is a meta-analysis of what everyone put down as their areas of expertise.
I left mine blank because I don't have one.
Okay, well, so unknown, maybe I'll have to create a new category for the Brian McCaulays of the world. The unknown, or the mysterious, something like that. I think mysterious would probably work better. But one of the really interesting things was when we were building out all these things, Human Kinetics asked me, so what are some of the areas in esports? And so a lot of the low-hanging fruit, really, really easy. There's health sciences and medical, and there's coaching and there's education and marketing and all of these kind of areas. But one of the things that I learned from some of this examination was there's some very, very, very niche kinds of areas, especially within kind of like the health and medical sciences, that there are people who have very, very, very specific interests, whether it's on a performance side, whether it's on a human body performance side. There's some really, really, really specialized areas. One of the areas that someone mentioned was they've got a really particular interest in some of the human body and cardiovascular responses to gaming, which to me is like, okay, well, that's health sciences. I'm just going to kind of put it in there. But it was really, really interesting when this is an actual area of expertise someone shared with us. And so, okay, well, maybe one of these days, next to the New England Journal of Medicine is going to be the New England Journal of Esports Medicine, something like this, where we're going to have our players fully like strapped up, and every body movement, every foot twitch, every toe wiggle, we're going to be measuring these things and figuring out exactly what the body's response to all of these kind of things, whether just in a PC, in a game, in VR, all of these kind of things. So yeah, I mean, there's so many opportunities out there. If you want to be broad, great. You want to be more specialized, great too. So it really just kind of comes down to what interests you, and kind of back to that original thing. What's your kind of core identity?
I agree, and I can tell that it's pretty interesting to measure, for example, physiological response of esport players, and also mental aspects such as affect and emotions. As I'm currently assessing those in professional players, it's a great project. What would you like to see happening in the future?
I mean, even though it would hurt JEGE, I want more esports journals, more esports publications. I mean, one of the biggest challenges that a lot of universities are facing is the only textbook that they have to use in esports is mine. Everything else they kind of have to cobble together from Newzoo and from Nielsen and from Nico Partners. That they're putting all of these kind of things together. And so, I mean, we need people to, publish books on esports events and communications. I think there will probably be in the next 6 months to a year a book on kind of the performance, health and performance, health sciences and performance of esports. I think that book is almost finished. And so that one's will probably come out next. After that, I would probably say like events and communications, because esports is a medium through which we can communicate. The lobby of Fortnite, where you can have concerts and all sorts of cool activities. That maybe we can do virtual shopping. Amazon can set up a shop there where people can go. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting possibilities there, I think. So I think that's short-term future. But yeah, long-term, as we advance in the technology, all of this is going to become more and more and more important. And so, I mean, I think a lot of this is going to be wearables. And then after wearables, I think the next technology is, for lack of a better word, injectables. Things that are actually put inside our body. In the same way in which people might say you could put a chip in your pet, so that if they run away, something like this, that there will be chips in our bodies, whether that's in our hands, in our fingers, something like that. So I think after some of the wearables, that's going to be some of what's going to come next. So that's a little bit more in the future. So
interesting.
I see Seth wrote a question here.
Yeah, I can summarize it if you want.
I can.
Okay.
So the benefits of partnering with human kinetics and negatives. Well, so certainly we are only human kinetics 27th journal. So by relative size, human kinetics is a smaller player. Routledge, Taylor, and Francis. I mean, they've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of journals. In addition, human kinetics has a little bit more of a human kinetics focus, biomechanics, kinesiology. a lot of the work that they've done, a lot of their publishing has been done in these medical areas, which then is interesting because of some of the opportunities then for them to publish some of these more medical and health and wellness focused materials. So I would say one of the biggest disadvantages for human kinetics would be its size. But then that also leads to a pretty big positive, which is I have regular communications with the head of the journal's division. I have assistants from human kinetics who work with me on a near daily basis, if and when need to be. When I published the textbook, I want to say we had a team of like 8 from human kinetics that were pretty much, certainly the last, I want to say 6 months, it was probably every day, multiple times a day, for at least 6 months, that this staff was dedicated entirely to the textbook and everything to do with the textbook. So whether it was the publishing, the editing, the online materials, the website, the marketing, all of these kind of things. So I guess I would say we can get a lot of personalized attention from these. In the past, I think a lot of journals, and past, probably present too, I could name names, I'm not going to, but there are journals where you might submit something and it might be in press or under review for months and months and months and years and years and years. Because Human Kinetics is a smaller shop, right now, within all 20, we are the 27th journal, within the 27 journals, from acceptance to in press is 24 days. There are very few journals that can kind of promote that kind of fact. In fact, I just one of my more recent publications probably it took for that from acceptance to in press was more like 4 to 5 months. So when you work with a smaller publisher like Human Kinetics, you face some of these challenges, but at the same point in time, they were willing to kind of take the chance on the esports book. They've been willing to take the chance on the esports journal, while a lot of other publishers have rejected these kind of proposals in the past. So, when you're a little bit smaller, you're a little bit more willing to look outside the box. And so I think it's been overall a really positive experience. Again, though, I mean, I've worked with Human Kinetics 10 years, 12 years. So they're good people. It's a small shop, Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. Good people there. Good, the Rainer Martins who started it. He wrote the original coaching textbook. It's 4th edition right now. So they've been all in on this pretty much since the beginning. So yeah, I mean they've been great to work with. But yeah, I mean any small shop you're gonna have challenges with it. But managing the process, yeah. So certainly on the process side, because we use Manuscript Central, there's no issues. Like Manuscript, it's so good. It is so good. One of the publications that already came through the process, we wanted to do something a little bit unique with it, and it was easy. I mean, Manuscript Central is such a great tool. So the process is easy. It's literally just click a couple of buttons. Like when I get a manuscript in, if I'm going to give it to Seth, I get it. Okay, to which associate editor? All 8 of my associate editors in that drop-down box to Seth, and then all of the emails just go right out. Seth, David Hedlund is giving you this. I get an email. He gets an email. He logs into the system. He chooses the reviewers, and it's off. All the deadlines and everything automatically sends reminder emails. I mean, it's one. There's no issues with any of this. I can't talk about the copy editing yet because we don't have anything yet to the copy editing process. I'm hopeful we'll get to one pretty soon, but we haven't gotten there yet. So I can't really say anything. However, having been, worked with other Human Kinetics journals, a lot of the companies, they outsource this to other countries. Human Kinetics doesn't. I think most, if not all of it, is done in the United States. And in fact, they don't even have like many of these tailored for others. If you need to like get your English grammar corrected, like a proofreading company, they have those. Like Human Kinetics, they don't even do that.
Yeah, with the textbook that I wrote with Human Kinetics, it was outsourced to people that were part-time, just copy editors, and I had good experience with one. Other one, I felt like I had to rewrite parts of the textbook because when they copy edited it, they changed intentional meanings of sections, so it was hit or miss. But I guess my overall overarching question is, I'm on the editorial board, editor of International Journal of Esports. What would be, is there any downside to International Journal of Esports deciding, hey, let's partner with a publishing company?
So the business, as Aaron explained the business model of IJ Esports to me in the beginning, it's a small fee to publish. That was, in the beginning it was no fee to publish, but there's a small fee to publish. So the business model of those two, obviously it changes a bit. I think when you kind of have that business model, at times as well, I think when you have this more financially motivated business model, you may cut corners when it comes to the editing process, some of these kind of things. You may prioritize speed, publishing your friend's stuff when maybe doesn't deserve to be published. You may go really outside the box. I mean, like I don't care, but certainly like when I look at IJ Esports and I see like tier one Scott, like the most knowledgeable people, and then I see like doctoral students' thesis kind of papers, kind of side by side. I mean, it's a pretty large contrast because you've got the highest of high quality stuff next to like scholars who are just learning how to write, how to put things together, some of these kind of things. So I would almost say a lot of this is more of a philosophical difference between at least my perception of how IJ Esports is doing it and how we're doing it. Now, from my original conversations with Aaron Koshy, he's the senior chief editor. Yeah. So my sense with him was that he had approached Routledge and Taylor Francis and others, and he'd been rejected. That nobody wanted to do this. So, okay, nobody wants to do this. I'll do this on my own. I'll build my own platform, build my own system, build my own website, some of these kind of things. The challenge, though, is probably to your original point, it's the process. And like, if I were to make a suggestion to you, just because like when I submitted there, like I'm literally like almost just uploading Word documents, like attachments to emails to the IJ Esports system. And then literally everything else, I'm like emailing directly back and forth with Aaron's email. And so, I mean, that's fine. I mean, it's a very hands-on familial type of system, but like Manuscript Central, it's so good. It is so good. So
yeah, I agree with a lot you said. I appreciate the response.
Yeah, I mean, I told Aaron in the past, I haven't told him recently, but I told Brian here in a previous conversation, I don't want to have an adversarial relationship with them. If there are things that we can do, they use a Creative Commons license on what they publish. HICSS, our second special issue, the Hawaiian Conference also uses the same license. And so as long as things are changed, they are allowed, we can publish them. So with HICSS, they require like 10-page Word documents, which is like 3,000 words. Our manuscripts are 40 pages up to 10 to 12,000, although we just did one that was 44 pages. So, we don't even, we are not even so concerned about some of that. So like the HICSS papers, as long as you build this out more, and of course in 10 pages, can you cover everything? Can you do a proper literature review? I mean, depending on your methods, you might have to just do like 3 paragraphs, which most journals will like laugh at you if that's what you submit. So, people can publish at HICSS, expand on that, and then publish. I wouldn't doubt that we could do something similar with IJ Esports stuff as well. But again, like some of the stuff you've done, I don't know how much better you could make that. I don't even know how much more you could change that in order to, be significant enough difference that it wouldn't be one group infringing on the others. Because it's like, there's a number out there. We looked into it. The number we came back with was like 20%'s got to be different. Something like that. There's something out there. But yeah, I mean, if there's a way in which JEG can work with IJ Esports, can work with any of these other journals, we're certainly happy to. I mean, for example, I obviously look at other journals. So IJ Esports is kind of the biggest player out there. The IGI's journal, last time I checked in with them, I think they had received 8 submissions and they had accepted 3. And they've been operating now for a year and
Probably
14
2
months,
years, I'd say.
something like that. And then of course we've got the Annals of Esports, the Harrisburg University of Technology, their journal. They haven't published anything, and they announced their journal a year ago at least. Something like this they announced just before we did. So those are the journals that are pretty much out there right now. And so the IGI journals published 3, and then IJ Esports has done maybe 30, I want to say 30 to 40, something like this. But again, there is a huge difference. Like I think mine ended up being like a commentary, because it was like Aaron just wanted 2,000 or 3,000 words. He wanted it very, very, very short. So I gave him what he wanted. Yours, the $1 billion myth, I mean, that's a full manuscript. So yeah, I mean, there's not a lot that's going on out there. I mean, it's really just IJ Esports right now. And then, within probably a year or two, we'll probably be publishing more than they are, just because of, we're publisher supported, and, we'll get into Scopus and Web of Science and all these things. So I don't know though. Oh, he's gone. But to the end point of that, I don't know if IJ Esports can really if they can move their stuff over to a publisher, because that's going to be a challenge. So, Alex, do you have any questions? You've been a quiet participant, quietly listening, smiling, nodding along.
Yes, there were a lot of interesting things. I'm currently doing my PhD on esports and also on value creation from a marketing perspective, focusing on value co-creation. And I have submitted one paper considering esports, not in one of the named journals, but in a sport business and management journal. It's published in Emerald. And okay. I will also submit for the special issue that Ryan just posted in for the jumps and from a media perspective. And for me, the question was answered, but I just want to go back to my point that esports is multidisciplinary and that it's hard, for example, if there is not a special issue and you want to get esports into a normal journal, you have on the one side argue that esports is multidisciplinary, but then you have also to argue why you want to submit it in this particular journal. So
yeah, so I know your piece from SBM. So I mean, number one, the idea is obviously really good because I'm interested in this too. I've done a lot of work on sport and value co-creation, and my whole argument that, my most cited piece that came out in 2014, about participation in fan consumption communities and with value co-creation. My whole point there, which is probably why it's been so cited, was fans do not attend sporting events alone. They may watch them alone, they may stream them alone, but they don't attend them alone. And so because of this, fans, when they are attending events, when they are participating in these kind of groups, they can create value. Because if they're worried that I'm not going to have anyone to go to a game with, there's a lot of people, even if you've got like a Bayern Munich ticket, but it's just you, there's a lot of people who would not want to go to a Bayern Munich game alone, that they'd want to go with others. And that phenomenon is very, very well, even more pronounced here in the United States. So there's a lot of this in traditional sports. Esports is a little bit harder, although I'm working on a piece right now where we've kind of looked at it from a three-pronged approach. Number one, kind of people are playing games. Number two, people are watching games. And number three, people are streaming games. And so there is this interplay between all of these things. And so when you do this, you have the ability to create value. So in an even greater extent in esports than in sports, predominantly through that third piece. When you go to an esports event, ESL1 or, whatever, you can create some value there. When you stream online, depending on how you're streaming it, if you've got Discord channels or, if there are some of these ways in which you can connect with others, you could create some value. But where you really create value is that streaming, especially if you are creating the stream yourself. Now, certainly by watching the stream, you can take part in, if you're on Twitch or whatever, the chats and some of these kind of things, there are some of these opportunities. But if you're creating those streams, and so one of the fundamental principles of sports was that you need athletes, because without if you don't have athletes, you can't have a game. But then to the similar extent, if it's just athletes with nobody watching, it's really not business. That's recreation. You need at least one or more people watching in order to kind of make this a business. And so you get this phenomenon is also true when it comes to kind of esports, that we can kind of have this recreational esports where we're just playing by ourselves. But then when we start playing games, creating streams, publishing those streams, engaging people, that's really where value creation can happen. To the extent that, like, my son is 7. He loves Minecraft and Roblox. When in his peak Minecraft phase, all he watched was Dream, George Not Found, and some of these influencers. I saw some of the numbers from like 2021. Dream had like 1.8 billion views of all of his videos, like just insane. But the reason why my son watched was he wanted to learn how they play. Dream is considered to be one of the best out there, and so he wanted to learn some of these techniques. He also then got into some of the smaller streamers who were like building things. There is a noob versus pro versus hacker series that a publishing group put out there, and so he would love to see the basic house, the pro house, and then the hacker house. And so he learned how to use like sticky pistons and redstone and all of these kind of things. And so he was educated and he was watching these to learn. And that is value co-creation at its core. You are literally creating knowledge like a school, like an educational environment. You're just putting it on YouTube, and then, the advertisements and whatever are paying. So there's a lot of really, really, really cool stuff that you can kind of examine here.
Yeah, 100%.
Good on you for publishing in SBM. So SBM is one of the index journals. So I don't think I reviewed this piece, but I'm one of the few reviewers for SBM on their esports stuff.
Mhm.
So, you know, the biggest challenge I see with people who are submitting kind of goes back to what I said earlier. It's in the methods.
Yeah.
And whether it's they go wrong in the methods or the data collection. Like, I am tired of 95% men samples. I'm just tired of it. And it just continues the perpetuation of gaming is men. It's not. They're like, I mean, you have to be, you know, all we're interested in is the players of Rocket League. We're doing research on Rocket League players. Okay, then you can have 95% men. Sure, no problem. Because my research suggests women hate Rocket League. Just with a passion. Like, just
Yes.
cars and soccer together, not my thing. They hate it. But for many, I mean, we're seeing 20, 30% female players. You get into some of the more casual, not a traditional esports, but things like Words with Friends, mobile games that are kind of, you know, compete with your friends, that more and more women are enjoying playing. Yeah, you got 55, 60% female consumers. So don't tell me, oh, this is just a limitation of the research. No, this is just it's a sign of bad research. You know,
Yeah, that's true.
the number of papers I've rejected that collect a sample of 110, and then they say, okay, I'm going to use PLS SEM because PLS is robust with small sample sizes.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I know PLS. Yes, I realize that this is what Hare and colleagues have been arguing for the last like 5 or 10 years, but it's still garbage in, garbage out. You cannot derive value from a quantitative survey with a sample of 110. Unless
hard,
you
yes.
are just absolutely just lucky. And we shouldn't be publishing things where you got lucky. No. And there's no way for me to know whether you're lucky because it's just such terrible data. You know, and then, I mean, one of the things I'm known for, you'll know you get a review from me when the review is like 2,000 words. A lot of my reviews, I'm well known for giving really, really, really long. I gave a 5,000 word review for an SMR piece a couple of years back, just because it was like right up my alley, and I really wanted to engage because it was doc students. I know it was doc students who wrote it.
Yes.
And great ideas, fantastic ideas, but probably a lack of mentorship or just not working with people who knew what they were doing. So it was like, all right, these are great ideas. And they got it published elsewhere using a lot of these ideas. It was like, thank God, someone actually used a review for good. I'm so glad
what
that
they are
all
for.
the time I put in benefited them. But it's one of those things where, you know, there's finding good mentors to kind of work with you. Now, the people you publish the SBM piece, I don't know Reinhard, but I know James.
Yeah.
So I don't. I can click on him here.
Yeah, Reinhard is my supervisor, and he already published with James about virtual reality games. So they did research.
Red Bull phenomenon, right? That piece.
And yeah, but I'm the one who's bringing the esports context in.
Yeah, so, you know, but again, like, how many PhD supervisors know sports but not esports?
Yeah,
like one of
most
so I got my
them.
PhD at Florida State.
Yes.
So at the time there was a Korean faculty member, YK Kim, like top 10 publishers in sport and business research in the world. There were a lot of Korean doc students, and many of them were looking at the same topic: sponsorship in video games. So it was all like, all of their surveys were like, when you play FIFA, do you see the advertisements on the dashboards around the game? do those, and then like do those impact you? And so there were like 3 or 4 of them that kind of all did this. Now on the quantitative side, I have no doubt YK as a supervisor, and Dr. Jeff James and others, that on the method side, yeah, their methods were tight. No doubt about it. But when you're trying to supervise doc students and you don't know about this kind of core area, there is a bit of a limitation. And so this is why these colloquiums that Oliver puts, is organized here, and that the ERN organizes. And I mean, probably twice a week I'm on these, talking to people all over the world about whatever with esports. Even coming down to nitty gritty like this, talking about like, hey, Alex, let's talk about your research topic. Let's see if we can help like focus you and channel you in a good direction.
Yeah.
Like this is what's needed. But like this is where the book, the journal, all of these things come into play, where we need to build these things. We need to build these resources so that more people will learn about this. One of the things that I've done is, I've got a good network of some pretty powerful people. And so I spend a lot of time telling them about esports. And then they go and buy my book, and then they give it to their like big, their powerful friends. Because their company, their CEOs, and they're going to be, they're thinking about, hey, could we start an esports team within our airline as a way to engage our employees? Some of these kind of things. And so, I mean, there's so many like cool and interesting things, but we are at the absolute infancy of esports and esports research. So whatever you can do, whether it's with Oliver, in Germany, there are some fantastic esports scholars. Several of them are involved in the journal. Tobias, obviously, he's another associate editor. He's fantastic. There's great scholars in Germany who are doing great things with esports. Connect with those people. See if you can work with those people.
I'm doing
the
also.
more you can, the faster your knowledge of what you're able to do and how to do things is going to go up exponentially. Because by working with these people, you'll get that understanding.
Yeah, definitely. I'm also engaged right now in the ERN, so this is a great opportunity, and also like to hear talking about this issue. And yeah, thank you, Oliver, for this opportunity to engage, and also congratulations to the 1 year, Oliver.
Thank you. Yeah, I think these are some good words in the end to also highlight the networking and exchanging with other researchers. And in stating that, I want to highlight that it's possible to present unfinished projects here in this colloquium. So if there's anyone out there that wants to present research designs or just discuss ideas, this is also possible. We are not limited to specific aspects or topics. This was a Q&A session. I highly enjoyed it. Thank you, David, for that. We can keep the conversation going, but before that, I'd like to end today's colloquium and express my gratitude for your time, David, and your insights.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Anything you want to say in the end?
No, just
okay.
If people are looking for an outlet, yeah, JEG is a great place to do it. We're right now we're hoping that 2 to 3 months, that's kind of like the minimum amount of time to get papers in, get them reviewed, get them back, kind of go back and forth, and then that's kind of the timeline we're working on, which is much faster than most other places.
Yeah.
Again, that's one of the great things about working with a brand new journal, is that there's lots of people who are ready to go. So, yeah, but thanks for the opportunity, Oliver.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining and watching. I try to remember all the links that have been mentioned and put them in the description. Thank you and goodbye.